Transmitter device activated. Coordinates set for Earth 2.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Earth-616 podcast, your weekly exploration of the Marvel Comics multiverse. I'm Peter Watson.
And I'm David Steele. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Now, last time on the Earth-616 podcast, we read stories from issue 103 of Strange Tales and issue 118 of the Fantastic Four. And I believe I said this week we're going to be covering stories from 4 issues of the Fantastic Four from a bit later on, but once I got into my planning and my digging around and my note-taking, I realised I was going to have to expand that. So we're actually today, we're going to be varying degrees of thoroughness. Is that a word, Peter?
Thorougosity.
Even better. Triple word score on Scrabble, you'd be laughing. We're going to be covering 6 issues of the Fantastic Four. We're going to be talking about issues 158 all the way through to 163. It's an epic that calls back to both of those stories we did last week and a whole lot more besides. Peter, very quickly, before we get properly on with it, loaded question, can you remember, or what are your significant early memories of the Fantastic Four?
I remember reading the UK reprint of it, but I think I'd seen them before. There was a cartoon as well that we had here that was shown in Glenn Michael's Cartoon Cavalcades. And yeah, I do remember that. But the Marvel UK reprint is probably what I remember most, although I think I saw one of the US comics first. Actually, before this era, where they were fighting a guy called, was it Gideon? I think it was Gideon. He had kind of like a cybernetic suit.
Wow.
And I think Reed and Sue had split up at this point. And I thought, this is very soap opera, or at least as my very young brain could comprehend such things. So, what about yourself?
Well, again, like I was saying last week about when I had vague memories of being introduced to Black Bolt and the Hulk and Lockjaw and everyone at a very young sort of age. Around about the time I think like the Hulk TV show must have been starting and things like that. And I have clear memories of owning a copy of issue 4 of The Invaders when I was very young, like 4 or 5 or something. But my main sort of very significant memory of the Fantastic Four is I had a Fantastic Four colouring book. Which I've spent years desperately trying to find another copy of. Mm-hmm. But I've never, every so often on eBay, I'll have a look and I'll type Fantastic Four colouring book and it's never popped up. So, listeners, if you're out there and you see what looks like a 1970s Fantastic Four colouring book, let me know. Because I remember it was cover images.
Sure.
Printed in black and white. And I'm pretty sure that a couple of the covers that we're talking about today were featured. I always remember very clearly there's a Fantastic Four annual, which I think is Black Bolt and someone else sort of held in glass canisters out in space.
Okay.
And that's one that I remember very clearly from this colouring book. Again, Quicksilver was there as well, and I remember Quicksilver popping up in a couple of issues of the Avengers that I had when I was really young, and there's one famous cover of, I think, him and Wanda standing pointing with a scary sky behind them. I could probably very quickly go and have a look and find out which issue it is, but I'm going to keep it vague. Do you have a lot of Fantastic Four comics? Do you have a big Fantastic Four collection?
Yeah, I've got a few hundred, yeah. Huh?
Wow! How wide, what's the range in your collection?
I think my earliest is 75 or something like that. I've got issue 100. I've got pretty much all this era that we're talking about today. I've got all the John Byrnes. I've got most of the stuff from the original run after that.
Right.
The Walt Simonson stuff, which is amazing, but no one talks about. It's really good.
Interesting.
It's a really good run. What about yourself?
Well, I like a lot of things, I've got every issue published with a cover date of 1986 and 1987 because that's when I was a good little Marvel zombie. And I've collected most of the Byrne run and had a few issues of some of the various Marvel UK series. A couple of issues of Marvel's Greatest Comics that I got second hand, the Overmind saga run about issue 113, I remember them.
Of course.
A few issues run about then. I had an issue, there's one, I think, when Johnny and the Thing are fighting on the cover, and I remember getting a copy of that, but being devastated to find out there was a page missing, which meant it was just useless, But yeah, I quite like the FF. I'm really looking forward to this new film this year to see how that happens. Mm-hmm. I think I quite like the 2000s movies, but I wasn't a big fan of the one already. Unbelievably, 10 years ago, the one with Michael Jordan and Miles Teller. I can't believe that's been 10 years.
Fant-4-stick.
Yeah. So, listeners, what's your first memory of the Fantastic Four? Do write in and let us know to our sister podcast, earth2podcast@gmail.com. So, listeners, if you'd like to read along with us, I would steer you towards Volume 15 of the Fantastic Four Masterworks, if you have it, or indeed maybe perhaps Essential Fantastic Four Volume 8. I think those are the ones that are relevant. So, Fantastic Four, issue 158. Published on the 25th of February 1975 on George Harrison's birthday. How cool is that?
Hey, very cool.
I think it's cool. God bless you, George. Peter is going to tell us about the cover to issue 158.
Issue 158, it's a white cover. We have a familiar face dominating it. Coming at us, surrounded by Kirby Crackle, we've got the head and the hands of ZEMU, the Merciless from the Fifth Dimension, or indeed last week's episode.
Yes.
And he's being attacked by Bashful Benji Grimm, the Human Torch, Medusa, Reed Richards, and Quicksilver. I can't see Sue there, but she might just be invisible. And the caption says, "The macabre menace of ZEMU, the Merciless." That's XEMU.
Yep.
Invaders of the Fifth Dimension.
So listeners, for 158 and indeed 159, I'm just going to summarise events for us, because if we did full reads of all 6 issues, we'd be here all night. And these ones, 158, 159, they're not the main reason we decided to do these stories. It's the sort of what sort of starts happening in a couple of issues' time. But we felt, because we talked about ZEMU in the Fifth Dimension last week, that better give you some detail on what happened when he came back. So, issue 158. Ben and Alicia go to the opera, but they fall foul of autograph hunters. I hate when that happens. And Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, still smarting over the fact that Crystal of the Inhumans got married to Quicksilver recently. He decides to hit a singles bar, and he finds one called Your Mother's Moustache. His attempt at chatting up one young lady goes very badly when her boyfriend pops up, so Johnny flames on, flies off through a hole in the ceiling, as you do. I hope his insurance covered it. We see Reed and Sue Richards, Mr. Fantastic and Invisible Girl. We see them debating whether or not Sue should return to the team. Johnny arrives back at the Baxter building and takes a shower, unaware that the aforementioned Quicksilver has snuck into FFHQ using a secret entrance after communicating via radio with someone at the Great Refuge, which is obviously, as we all know, who lives at the Great Refuge, Peter?
That'd be the Inhumans.
Yes, correct. So Quicksilver bursts in on Johnny. Johnny's still wearing his red Human Torch uniform at this point, which I always thought was really, really cool. And Quicksilver tells Johnny that he has questions for him, but predictably, Johnny isn't in the mood, and a skirmish begins. But that ends when the speedy mutant takes out the Human Torch, just as Reed, Sue, Ben, Alicia and Medusa all arrive. How awkward. Everyone calms down, helpfully, and Quicksilver starts to explain himself, saying that he is there from Medusa at the behest of Black Bolt, who, as we all know, is leader of the Inhumans. He's here to collect Medusa. Quicksilver slips into flashback narration mode and tells how 2 nights earlier the Inhumans' hidden land had been invaded by ZEMU and his warriors from the Fifth Dimension, who we all met last week. The Inhumans had faced up to the intruders, but they were too strong, with Karnak and Gorgon the first to fall. A shockwave then took out everyone else, with only Triton left free, because he'd been asleep in his own damper quarters. Now that's what it says damper quarters. I'll leave you to fill in the gaps there. Triton escapes by diving into the fabled bottomless fountain. ZEMU then starts to explain to Quicksilver and the Inhumans what he's up to, taking care to gag Black Bolt with a metal clasp. Amusingly, once ZEMU tells the Inhumans his name, they've all heard of him, because Johnny has taken the time to very helpfully tell them all about what happened in Strange Tales issue 103.
Of course he has.
Of course he has. ZEMU unveils and demonstrates the Thunderhorn, a massive Kirby-esque cannon that destroys a mountaintop in the distance and is activated by ZEMU shouting into it. So he demonstrates by blowing up this mountain in the distance. He calls it a Saser, spelled S-A-S-E-R, which Karnak very impressively identifies as an acronym for Sound Amplification by Stimulated Emission of Radiation. Well done, Karnak. Always a smart fellow. As Crystal says, it works with sound in the same way that a laser does with light, and it emerges that ZEMU plans to force Black Bolt to use his voice powers on the Thunderhorn, and in order to force Black Bolt to comply with his desires, ZEMU sends Quicksilver to Earth to fetch Medusa, the one person Black Bolt could not stand to see die or suffer, or what have you, basically to ensure Black Bolt's cooperation. And to ensure that Quicksilver cooperates and does what he's told, ZEMU tells him Crystal will die if he doesn't fetch Medusa. Quicksilver is transported to Earth and appears in the swamp from Strange Tales 103, so that's quite handy. Another callback to Strange Tales 103, or our previous episode. The Fantastic Four decide to go to the Great Refuge, despite Sue's instinct that it could be a trap. And so Reed, Ben, Johnny, Medusa and Quicksilver depart in a rocket from the roof of the Baxter building as a crowd of New Yorkers look on. And that was issue 158. Peter will now tell us about the cover to issue 159.
Issue 159, we have, coming at us, Bashful Benji Grimm, fists raised, front and centre of the cover. Other people are charging towards us, including Medusa, Reed Richards. Oh, there's Sue this time. Yes, she's turned up, that's good. Flying in at the back, there's Black Bolt and the Human Torch. Triton is coming at us as well, and there's Karnak bringing up the rear. Is that Gorgon in the background? Hard to tell.
Probably.
So it's all the Inhumans, they're all running towards us, and it looks like it's Atlan in the background. Havoc in the Hidden Land is the caption.
I remember this cover being used to sell Marvel Comics themed stationery in adverts back in the day.
All right, cool.
So it's quite nice to actually read the story decades after that. So, issue 159 published on the 25th of March 1975, just a few weeks after my second birthday. As the rocket takes off from the Baxter building, Ben and Reed discuss Sue's status in the team. They soon arrive in the Himalayas, the site of the Inhumans' hidden great refuge, to find it apparently deserted. But suddenly, they are attacked by a golem-like grey figure who Reed identifies as being made from an asbestos-like material, given his immunity to the Human Torch's flame. Johnny is taken out, and Ben recognises their assailant as being one of the Inhumans before he is shot in the back by ZEMU, and then passes out. Ben passes out, that is. The heroes are restrained and placed in a cell. The Thing and Quicksilver bicker, as you'd expect, but are interrupted by Valeria and Phineas, who are also prisoners. Valeria and Phineas also from the Fifth Dimension, who we met last week.
Yay.
Johnny recognises them at once, and a footnote alerts us to Strange Tales 103. Take a drink every time I mention Strange Tales 103. And it also mentions the fact that the story was reprinted more recently in issue 3 of The Human Torch, which you'll have seen a cover for on our socials last week. Valeria explains that ZEMU had grown strong enough to again reassert control in the Fifth Dimension. The Thing snaps the chains holding him and frees the other heroes from their bonds, and he wonders to himself why Mr. Fantastic hasn't stretched out of his ropes on his own. We learn that Phineas is responsible for the development of the Thunderhorn, the weapon that ZEMU plans to use. Medusa has been taken to ZEMU, and she is horrified to see Black Bolt bound and in position to activate the Thunderhorn. ZEMU demonstrates the machine's power to Medusa using the input from a sonic blaster. ZEMU announces that his target wasn't random, but a Chinese army air installation. ZEMU ultimately plans to escalate tensions between China, Russia and the US in the hope of starting a nuclear war. If Black Bolt won't help him, ZEMU will kill all the Inhumans. Meanwhile, the FF try to escape from their cell, but there isn't a crack for Reed to stretch through. Johnny can't burn them out without using up all of the oxygen, and Ben's punch to the wall doesn't have the desired effect, except it has caused a crack to appear in the floor, through which water starts to ooze, before a section of the floor shatters, revealing what Reed surmises is an underground river. It's no surprise then, when the Inhuman Triton emerges from the water, and he leads all heroes to escape through the underground waterway. There is a discussion on what to do next, with Mr. Fantastic advising caution in case ZEMU kills his hostages. We then see that China has fired missiles in retaliation against the damage caused by the Thunderhorn. ZEMU is then stunned to see the rocket the Fantastic Four arrived in taking off. Have they run away? What's going on? Do you think they've run away, Peter?
Yes. They're utter cowards.
Yes. ZEMU again tries to force Black Bolt to obey him by threatening the other Inhumans, but they suddenly hear the approach of the Chinese fighter jets, which causes ZEMU to panic, and he returns to the Fifth Dimension, saying he'll come back when the planes have gone, if there's anything to come back to. Now, what an absolute... I nearly swore there, listeners. Gorgon is able to free himself and takes out ZEMU's forces with a stamp of his hoof. I love when that happens. It's always cool. Karnak is worried about the imminent Chinese attack, but he is given reassurance by the invisible girl, who suddenly reveals herself to be standing on top of the Thunderhorn, and she says that the refuge will not be bombed. Black Bolt is released, as Sue is lifted down from the Thunderhorn by Reed, who is there with Ben, and not on the recently departed rocket. Sue is deep in concentration. I'm miming that for the benefit of our YouTube viewers. As Ben points out, the Chinese fighters are flying off without actually taking action. The Thing and the Inhumans then have a very satisfying fight with ZEMU's remaining soldiers that ends with the fifth dimensional invaders surrendering. The Thing then tears the Thunderhorn apart with his bare hands, and it looks cracking, so be assured that will show up in the socials. We then cut to the fifth dimension, where we see what happened when ZEMU arrived back. he was met by the Torch, Quicksilver, Phineas and Valeria, who had flown there in the Fantastic Four's rocket. Johnny secures ZEMU and Quicksilver suggests they leave. Before they go, Johnny and Valeria share an intimate moment as he kisses her.
Ah,
I know. And this reassures Pietro that his love rival may be able to move on from Crystal. Don't hold your breath, everyone. Valeria encourages Johnny to think about what he wants. After all, he knows how to reach her, how to get to the fifth dimension. Johnny and Quicksilver return to Earth in time for Sue to explain how she had used the Thunderhorn to render the Great Refuge invisible to the fighter jets, so they flew over the Himalayas without bombing anything. Thank goodness for that. Ben is surprised to see Johnny back in his blue uniform. That's something he has decided to do, inspired by Sue rejoining the team. Medusa decides to leave the Fantastic Four, to stay with Black Bolt, and the FF head home. And that is all we have to say on issues 158 and 159. However, the FF letters page at this point was called, I think, the FF fan page, or Fantastic Four fan page. So there's one very short letter from issue 163, which Peter's going to read to us now because it addresses something very important.
Dear Marvel Madmen, I've noticed that in Human Torch 3, the reprint of Strange Tales 103, ZEMU, XEMU, was called ZEMU, ZEMU. Right? Unless he changed his name, and I for one don't believe it. So I'll be expecting a no prize. And that's from Paul A. Leach from Waukegan, Illinois.
Waukegan, Illinois. I wonder if Steve's been there. Steve, get the car out if it's a nice day, go for a drive, find a sign, take a photo.
Go for a walk in Waukegan.
Very good. Did you see what he did there, listeners?
You can walk again and walk again.
Yes. Editorial response reads, "It's yours, Paul. Yours and everyone else who's pointed out that particular little goof. You don't really see it as much of a mistake, though, since in English an X at the beginning of a word is pronounced like a Z. And since no one's ever written ZEMU's name down except some comic book writers who exist in another dimension, who's to say exactly how the name is spelled in a fifth dimension? Not us, friend." We're just going to be dipping into the letters pages as we go, but I want to quickly point out, in case he's listening, or in case any of his kids are listening, there is a letter from a Mark Caldwell, which is the name of my big cousin, my dad's sister's oldest kid. I've no idea if Mark listens to the podcast. Maybe Libby or Will do, a couple of his kids. So if you are listening, let me know. It'd be quite funny if it was our Mark Caldwell, but I don't think he was in New Mexico in 1975. He was probably still in Paisley. So we now move on to issue 160 of the Fantastic Four, published on the 22nd of April 1975, just a few weeks after the publication of Giant Size X-Men #1. Just to give you an idea what was going on in the world. Isn't that interesting, Peter?
It most certainly is, yes. My goodness, what an era. Can you imagine you went to the stand and you picked up this instead of Giant Size X-Men #1?
Imagine going to the stand and buying 10 copies of this instead of 10 copies of Giant Size X-Men. Then trying to sell them 40 years later. So, Peter is going to tell us about the exciting cover to issue 160 of the Fantastic Four.
Yes, we're on a city street, but it's pretty wrecked, to be honest. Again, Bashful Benji, front and centre. He's wearing an overcoat, which is pretty tattered, I'll be honest. He's holding a lamppost that he's grabbed and is using as a club because he's being attacked by a barbarian warrior-looking guy hurtling thunderbolts on the back of a winged lizard creature. And it's ARKON, the Annihilator, making his return, and indeed his Earth-616 podcast debut. And ARKON says,
"No man, no thing can stand against the thunderbolts of ARKON, the Annihilator."
And Bashful Benji retorts, "Just come a little closer, laughing boy, and I'm gonna make Hank Aaron look like a little leaguer."
I looked Hank up. He's a baseball player, but I've forgotten what teams he played with.
Oh, the Sox. I don't know.
Listeners, if you know anything about Hank Aaron, you can write in and tell us, and we'll read it out in future. I really like this cover. The red background really pops against the sort of the bluey, purpley shades of the city, and I love how Ben's just basically ripped, or is it Ben? Aha. The Thing has ripped up just like a lamppost to slug him with. It's very, very exciting. So, we now start issue 160. For those of us who worry about such things, I'll quickly point out as well that this issue was published a few weeks after the first birthday of Stuart from Menswear. So there you go. Make sure you're paying attention. So jumping into the issue, we get an opening caption which tells us the story is called In One World and Out the Other. The opening splash echoes the cover as we see what appears to be the Thing running from the attack of a barbarian figure on the back of a large flying dragon-like creature. We are told the date is the 14th of February 1974. The thing's clothes are badly damaged in the attack, and he seems very, very panicked. We learn the attacker is called ARKON the Magnificent, and a footnote from Roy Thomas tells us that he was last seen in issue 84 of the Avengers. A quick check of Mike's tells us that that was published in November 1970 and was actually written by Roy, and ARKON had first appeared in issue 75 of the Avengers, published in February 1970. ARKON seems to be pursuing the Thing in order to dispense justice. ARKON and the Thing battle to and fro, with ARKON hurling lightning bolts that cause havoc and panic in the streets. Ben Grimm's girlfriend Alicia, who we all remember sadly was blind, is caught up in the unrest, and hearing that the Thing is involved, Alicia makes her way towards the confusion. The fight moves to a building site, and when the Thing grabs a motorised crane, ARKON strikes it with a thunderbolt, and the conducted current takes the Thing out. Alicia making her way towards the Thing, who's lying face down on the ground. Alicia saying, "Ben! Oh, Ben, where are you? What has he done to you? Say something, Ben, so I can..."
No. Get back, whoever you are. Get away from here as quickly as you can. You can't fight it. No one can.
Alicia leans down towards the Thing, saying, "Then it is you. The sound of your voice, but the words, they're not like you. They're..." And she breaks off, saying, "Ben, I hear the beat of wings overhead. He's coming. The one you were fighting. We've got to get out of..."
No!
The Thing struggles to his feet, saying,
I've got to fight back. Got to stop him. It's the least I can.
He breaks away from Alicia, who manages to grab a fragment of his shirt, and she says, "Come back, Ben! You can't!" But then ARKON is walking towards them, and he pulls one of his thunderbolts from the quiver on his back. With a zack, he strikes the Thing, saying, "Save your pious admonitions, girl, for another more worthy of them. Be glad merely that ARKON's debolt is meant only for himself and for the defeated Thing." The Thing moans as he's struck. Ugh. And ARKON concludes, "And not for the likes of you." And a caption reads,
Then in a flash which momentarily blinds those skulking bystanders who can see, both victor and vanquished suddenly vanish.
A bystander helps Alicia to a taxi which she takes to the Baxter building. And she's very surprised when she gets there to be met by all four members of the team, all four members of the Fantastic Four. And she explains to everyone what had been going on, about the other Thing and the way he spoke and how he left behind a piece of his shirt when he vanished. Johnny says at this point, "We know a guy named ARKON Reed. Should stand out in a crowd, rides a winged monster, throws thunderbolts."
I'm starting to get a glimmer, Johnny. After a while, I'll examine the records we exchanged with the Avengers as part of our reciprocal agreements. Right now, I'm expecting someone I'd like all of you to meet.
With that, Reed and Sue walk off, getting Alicia with them. Torch says to the Thing, "You coming, Ben?"
In a minute, kid. First, I got a little glimmer all my own, and I think I'll stay here and check it out.
And the Thing thoughtfully holds up the fragment of shirt that belonged to his doppelganger. We then see Ben contacting Crystal and Quicksilver at the Great Refuge, where we've just been, obviously, and asks if he can borrow Lockjaw. Big Dog arrives, and after a big slobbery kiss of greeting, Ben says,
Now pay attention, Pooch. I got you here 'cause you can travel through dimensions and all that crud. And 'cause I got something here for you to sniff. Okay, pal?
And Ben hands a piece of shirt to Lockjaw, who takes a big sniff 'cause he's a good boy.
Okay. Now find the Joe that lost this rag. Got it?
And the final panel of this page, there's a massive zap sound effect as a golden aura surrounds Big Dog and Ben, as Ben says,
By George, I think he got it. But so help me, if we turn up next to a fire hydrant...
Stereotypical behaviour of dogs. Anyway, on the next page we meet the person that Reed was talking about earlier. A Mr. DeVour, a representative of a large company to whom Reed has decided to sell his 51% controlling interest in Fantastic Four Incorporated. Johnny and Sue aren't too impressed. Elsewhere, Ben and Lockjaw take a wrong turn and have a quick encounter with a scary-looking monster right out of the pages of Jack Kirby's current Sandman series. Ben gets Lockjaw to take another sniff, and they move on to another dimension and arrive outside a large castle, which Ben sees and compares to Disneyland. Ben recognises the castle. Ben and Lockjaw make their way inside to be greeted by a parade of monsters straight out of an old horror movie. There's a mummy, a werewolf, one remotely resembling the creature from the Black Lagoon, And as they all rush towards Ben, a caption reads,
Okay, by now, any Marvelite who's been around more than a year or two has already figured out just where here is, and can award himself a no prize with stannous fluoride. But we'll just keep you latecomers in suspense for a little while longer, as...
Ben tussles with the horrible creatures, but he's really not in the mood to fight, and he quickly dispenses with the monsters that are then revealed to be robots. Thing then sees another group of monster robots are attacking someone else, and as he moves closer he sees...
Holy cow, it's me! Me is Ben Grimm and Susie!
Yes, we see who we recognise being the human form of Ben Grimm and what appears to be Sue Storm. The other Ben tries to fight off the monsters and protect the other Sue using a nice big stick, and our Ben steps in to help, grabbing one robot and saying...
I don't know why I'm so surprised. Ain't like I was back in the Bronx or someplace. Still, I gotta uphold my image as the idol of millions, so...
Ben grabs one passing monster, saying,
Sorry about that, Quasimodo, but this is where I ring your chimes. Ring your chimes? Sheesh. When's the last time I heard that old clinker?
Ben smashes the robot into a couple of others and then starts to introduce himself to the other Ben and Sue, but he's interrupted by a robot who looks very much like the Marvel Comics Frankenstein monster at this period. They exchange blows and Ben eventually punches him through the castle wall and into the castle moat. Gosh. Ben finds Lockjaw munching on bits of robot before he returns to the others. The human Ben starts off the conversation saying,
Glad you're safe, old buddy. Them robots of yours went wacko when we landed in.
Look, I don't want to shake you two up or nothing, but I ain't Reed Richards. Never was.
Sue, or this version of Sue at least, then says, What do you mean? You and Ben went up years ago into that cosmic storm, and you came back the way you are.
Yeah, we took the same space up in my world, only there was 4 of us.
Your world?
Appella Reeds ought to dig this. I'm from what you can call another dimension. In my ballpark, the thing is Benjamin J. Grimm.
Huh? You mean you're me?
Check. I ended up here once before, and your Reed thing explained it all to me. Where I come from, Susie's married to Reed, and Reed's normal, more or less.
There's another footnote here to FF 118, which I bet you're glad we told you about. Sue then says at this point, I think I'm beginning to understand. After all, he speaks just as you do, Ben darling.
Getting back to Stretch, I mean Reed. I got a report he was in my world today and got zapped by some creep named ARKON. You two know anything about that?
The other Ben replies,
Nope. We just came here to thank Reed again for getting rid of my flaming and stretching powers, which I never wanted anyway. I could have used them tonight, though, before you showed up. Thanks.
Ben is, our Ben, that is holding up a photograph of Reed as the Thing, which we can see has been signed and dedicated, and he dismisses his plan when he says,
Forget it.
And then the alternate, the human Ben, continues.
Listen, you know a lot about us, so I'll take a chance you're on the level. We also came here to try and talk Reed into leaving this dump. He sounded bad lately, on the phone like he was under a strain. Ain't healthy anyhow, spending all your time on robot research. He kept warning us to keep away, but he wouldn't say why.
To which Sue says, So he came anyway, and then you showed up.
Any idea how come your Reed might have skipped out? Or why this ARKON guy was chasing him?
None, unless it has something to do with the metal sign we saw here when we first came up.
And at this, human Ben points up to a massive metal plaque, which is next to the entrance of the castle. He continues.
Of course, I got no idea what it means, but it wasn't here the last time we stopped by.
And the camera, if you like, tracks in. We get a nice close-up of this plaque. I want you to bear it in mind, listeners. It reads, Reed Richards Robotics Incorporated, a division of interrelated technocracies Unlimited. We reach the final page of issue 160, and the caption for the first panel reads,
Meanwhile, back in what we naively refer to as the real world...
Reed, Sue and Johnny are debating Reed's decision to sell, but after Mr. DeVore assures Reed that the Fantastic Four will be able to continue operating as normal, Reed signs. An angry Johnny leaves, and as Mr. DeVore congratulates Reed, we track in towards the contract on the desk, and the caption reads,
Early today, a defeated thing from another world put it a wee bit differently. If only anyone had noticed it at the time. He said, and we quote, You can't fight it.
Yes, and the emphasis is on the IT, which we now realise is an acronym that stands for, and what we see lying on the desk, Interlocking Technologies, Unlimited. And a caption rounds out this issue saying,
Maybe he didn't mean our old friend ARKON after all.
So that takes us to the end of issue 160. So we're now going to read you one quick letter from issue 164.
Dear Roy, the Marvel time paradox never ceases to amaze me. The story in Fantastic Four 160 started on February 14th, 1974 on page 1 and ended on February 14th, 1975 on the last page, according to the contract Reed signed. I realise that time flies when you're having fun, but a whole year just to sign a blasted contract? Even the Hulk wouldn't take that long. I'll expect my no prize in the mail soon, or else I'll have to tell the world that the Continuity Kid is a continuity klutz. And that's from Bruce Spicer, Finch Street, New Orleans.
Editorial response goes like this. Don't you dare, Bruce. Rascally Roy informs us that the 1974 date on page 1 was merely a typographical error caused by the fact that he wrote the story in late 1974 and never noticed that he'd accidentally put down the wrong date. Come on, Roy. This is good. This is the first time we get to slag Roy Thomas off. Anyway, we hope that his goof didn't mar your enjoyment of the story. Others who spotted the same error, and they were legion, include, and we got a whole big list with normal names and some funny made-up names who wrote in to complain about this really important thing that anyone with a brain probably would have not worried too much about on reading the story. So now we move to issue 161, and Peter will tell us about the cover.
We have. The Thing, again, he's the centre of all these covers. But he's in the jaws of a giant prehistoric monster that's trying to eat him. And viewing this through some sort of portal, we have Reed, Johnny, and Sue. Reed's wearing his podcasting headphones.
He is.
Yes. Johnny's starting to flame on, and Johnny's saying,
Reed, Ben can't hold out any longer against that Tyrannosaur. We've got to help him.
We can't, Torch. Live or die, the Thing fights alone.
And listeners, this is a Defenders 39 cover if ever there was one.
Because nothing like that happens within the story.
Yeah. This cover was one of the pages in that colouring book I mentioned at the top, so it was very interesting seeing this one. So, issue 161, published on the 27th of May, 1975. Opening splash panel, we see that the story is called
All the World Wars at Once.
We haven't really been given the credits. We should maybe give the credits for this issue.
Yes, it's Roy Thomas, writer-editor, Rich Buckler, artist, Joe Sinnott, embellisher, Glynis Ween, colourist, and Joe Rosen, letterer.
Awesome. So, Fantastic Four 161 begins with a great splash panel of Mr. Fantastic testing his powers. And over the next page or so, he concludes that his elongating abilities are losing their potency as he gets older. He keeps this to himself, though, but this only makes Susan suspicious. We then cut to Johnny, who is still very angry about what Reed has done in selling his majority stake, and he has a nice moan about it out loud in case anyone missed last issue, to the point where he flames on and flies off, much to the alarm of some pedestrians. Obviously, regretting the damage he'd done to the pavement, Johnny is thinking, OK, Storm, you made your dramatic exit. That and a dime will get you a Xerox of a cup of coffee. The fact is, you know why you're so uptight all the time, don't you? You still can't get over the fact that you blew it with a gal named Crystal. And though you haven't admitted it, even to yourself, you know just where you're going to head to find a sympathetic shoulder. We see Johnny flying out the city to a very familiar, well, when he says, this swampy area. In what's left of the wilds of Long Island. Here's where you first discovered the gateway to what we lovingly call the fifth dimension. Footnote tells us,
Human Torch 3, n'est-ce pas? Roy, the bilingual boy.
Interesting. Of course, Human Torch 3, but originally printed in Strange Tales 103. Take a drink every time I say Strange Tales 103. Johnny flames off, thinking, and last time out, a certain blue-skinned young lady showed you just where to stand to go back and forth at will. And we see Johnny moving past a tree and growing transparent as he thinks, here I go, doing the fade-out bit. I just hope that 5D's the only place it does connect to, because I can't control where I'm going any more than a wood chip in a maelstrom. And we see, with an amazing Kirby Dot-infused background, Johnny's silhouette passing through the dimensions as he thinks, feels strange, dizzy, like I'm being torn apart painlessly, then reassembled. Which is probably exactly what happened, and he has arrived safely in the fifth dimension. Johnny's arrival shakes up the locals, to the point where some of the local guardsmen try to restrain him, thinking he's an androme. Johnny flames on, which only ends with him being taken down by the guardsmen using guns that shoot ice. Good grief. Intriguingly, one of the guardsmen calls the torch a mechanical monster, and they announce they will dismantle him. I know. In the nick of time, though, Johnny is saved by Phineas, reinstalled as leader of the Fifth Dimension, and his daughter, the beautiful Valeria. Phineas dismisses the guardsman, saying,
"Activate her, happy fools! This young man is a flesh and blooder, not a robot. But the accursed andrones may be striking elsewhere in the city at this very instant. Now disperse, search and destroy."
Johnny gets to his feet, saying, "Thanks, Phineas, and hi, Val, but I'm afraid I don't get any of this. What in blazes is an androne, and why'd that goon squad think I was one of them?" Valeria replies, "It's a long story, Johnny." "Then start telling it, for Pete's sake," says the Torch, throwing his arms in the air like an absolute so-and-so. "Just yesterday, the FF saved this place. Now I drop in for a visit and nearly get lynched. I think I've got a right to know."
"Indeed you do, Johnny Storm. But perhaps you will not believe me when I tell you that we are at war, and the enemy is Reed Richards."
Phineas gets a nice big close-up for emphasis there. Great shot of his moustache. Johnny exclaims, "What?" And Phineas narrates the next couple of panels.
"Allow me to explain, my young friend. Only minutes after you left us, an alien craft appeared from thin air, and from it emerged the andrones."
Yes, and we see the andrones. There's a touch of the Cybermen to them, actually. Humanoid robots with a sort of golden greenish tint to them. Phineas continues.
"They are called this because they are metallic androids, which seem from the first to be controlled by some far-off unseen power. Both being huge and formidably armed, they laid waste to much of our city before they were driven out, at least for the moment."
We return to regular storytelling as Johnny says, "It sounds like whoever's behind these creeps was just waiting for ZEMU to fall from power, probably figuring they'd have a better chance against more peace-loving types."
"No doubt. Meanwhile, come this way, where we'll be safer."
They enter a room, and we see a bank of television monitors. One which seems to show part of a city, a regular Earth city, one which seems to show part of an aeroplane flying, one which shows what looks like a Saturn V rocket taking off, and one where we can see the seal of the President of the United States, but a man with grey hair and glasses. Phineas stands in front of all this and says to the Torch,
"This multi-viewer shows us our enemy dimension as calculated by our world's chief scientists. I think you'll find it disturbing."
"It's the Earth. No, wait, it is. And it isn't. That man speaking behind the presidential seal is Nelson Rockefeller."
"Yes, this is a second Earth, not unlike your own, but not quite identical to it, and for still unknown reasons, this Earth has declared war on the Fifth Dimension, using androids designed chiefly for this corporation."
And we see a shot of the plaque that bears the legend, "Reed Richards Robotics Incorporated, Interrelated Technocracies," which, if you're paying attention, listeners, was the plaque that human Ben Grimm pointed out at the castle in the last issue. Phineas continues,
"And by this man, whose name is Reed Richards."
and we see a shot of what looks like the Thing. Johnny exclaims, "Reed? Now wait a minute, Phineas. You know good and well that's the Thing's ugly kisser. And when it comes to androids, he can find his tail with both hands and a compass. But he breaks off. What's that humming sound? Valeria cries, "The andrones! One of them must have followed us." There's a massive ratch sound effect as an androne busts through the wall, another one following close behind, but the Torch quickly takes them out, leading him to observe their weakness to heat. Phineas asks Johnny,
"Then will you lead us, Johnny, against their world?"
"I'll tell you, Phineas, I don't like sneak attacks, I never did. In other words, I'm signing on till we find out who's behind these junkyard stormtroopers." There's a slow dissolve as we return to the home dimension of the andrones, and we again see the Reed Richards Robotics Incorporated, a division of Interrelated Technocracies, Unlimited plaque. Our Ben, aka the Thing, is talking to his Ben counterpart, remembering his earlier visit to this Earth in Fantastic Four 118, or if you can remember that far back, our previous episode. Our Ben is saying that he didn't think this version of Reed would be the type to hook up with big technology. The other Ben starts to say that he wasn't, but it's cut short because of a brief discussion of what he should call our Ben, aka the Thing. Leaving Lockjaw behind, chewing on robots again, The Thing and the alternate Ben and Sue take a handy flying car and head to New York, where they are stunned by a full-page revelation of a giant Tyrannosaurus Rex causing havoc in the city. Captions at the bottom of the page draw attention to further details.
And if our Benjamin J. Grimm looked just a little more closely, he'd see beneath the Tyrannosaur's massive flailing tail a small army of full-fledged Vikings, direct from their long-run engagement in the Elder Ada. But he'd better look fast, for they're even more fearful than the rest of the human populace. After all, they never even heard of Charles Darwin.
The flying car is then suddenly buzzed by a pterodactyl. The Thing grabs it by the foot, hoping to hitch a lift to the nearest roof, but it's too heavy for the flying creature, and they both drop towards the open jaws of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Luckily, the Pteranodon has enough momentum to avoid the T-Rex, and Ben lands on its back, saying,
Leastways, I managed to avoid being a between-meal snack. Now, if I can just remember the last 10 rodeo flicks I saw on the tube.
Unfortunately, the dinosaur isn't having it, and shrugs Ben off. The T-Rex lunges for him, but the Thing is quick enough to knock it out with a punch. Goodness me. Sue and the other Ben are very impressed. Suddenly, we hear a voice, clearly from some sort of broadcast, that says,
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
There's a TV in that store window. Guess old Jerry Baby wants to calm the plebs down, so... Huh? That ain't President Ford. It's Rocky.
Yep, Ben meaning Mr. Rockefeller, who neither of us have bothered to do any research on, so you can you can just do that yourself, listeners. Maybe ask an older relative. And we see President Rockefeller on the television, and he's saying, Most of these attacks by creatures and warriors of another era have been temporarily turned aside, but it's still advised that all civilians... And then we see the human Ben standing outside the TV shop saying,
Hear that? The President says it's going to be okay.
Your Prez, not mine. I didn't vote for him. Or Ford either, as far as that goes.
Cut back to the Prez on the telly, who's saying, Our Defense Department scientists have discovered the presence of another Earth, existing in a dimension alongside ours. It is from there that these time probes have apparently been launched, by means of a device unknown to us at present. But we must use any means at hand to... And it cuts back to the Thing here, who says,
He thinks our Earth did it. That's crazy. Or is it? Reed's got a time travel gizmo left over from when we battled Doc Doom once. Maybe... No, he'd never use it to attack anybody. Hey, what the...
Thing breaks off because there's a sudden vroom sound effect, and what looks like a gas canister is opened up around him.
Knockout gas. I saved the whole blamed city, and all they do is gas me.
And the Thing passes out, landing on the ground with a massive thud. The human Ben says,
I'm sorry, buddy. Believe me, I'm sorry. I had to do it, Sue. You see that, don't you? If I hadn't used one of Reed's gas capsules, the approaching troops might have opened fire.
Sue takes Ben's arm and says, Yes, Ben, I know. You did the right thing. I'm sure he'll understand.
Within moments, Ben Grimm, test pilot and friend of noted, if long-vanished, scientist Reed Richards, has identified the Thing to the authorities, who've placed New York under martial law.
We then see the Thing being carried off by half a dozen soldiers as a more senior officer yells at us, All right, you civilians, clear the area. We got us a hostage now from that world that's attacking us. We're going to find out what's behind all this, if we have to sweat it out of him. Human Ben Grimm gets a close-up as he says,
Tell me again, Sue. Tell me again about how I did the right thing.
And as they start to walk off, he continues,
And me, I'll keep on trying to believe it. Come on, let's go home.
And there's a slow dissolve, and a caption reads,
While, back on Earth 1... Oops, wrong comic mag.
We're back with our Reed and Sue. Reed is worrying to himself about how Johnny is not answering the signal, and how Ben the Thing seems to have disappeared without a trace.
Maybe a spin around the city in the Fantastic Car will clear away some of the cobwebs. Then I can...
He breaks off because Sue has walked in.
Sue, what's wrong? To coin a phrase, you look as if you've just seen a ghost.
Perhaps I have, Reed. The ghost of our whole world.
What?
Come, look at the newsbreak monitor, quickly.
Good Lord, it can't be.
And we see a news report showing destruction of a city, but it's not too clear on the screen what it is, but thankfully the voice on the television tells us when it says, Massive glaciers already crushing small cities in northern Canada and Scandinavia, and moving relentlessly southward. Sue says, He said something about another ice age.
An ice age? But that's one of the few things against which mankind has no defence. It could mean the end of civilized life on Earth.
The news reporter continues over shot of the glacier causing destruction, saying, "Already, scientists have discovered a strange radiation source which seems to be spurring the glacier's sudden growth and movement. They say it comes from some unknown world beyond time, some unguessed fifth dimension." To which Sue says, "Fifth dimension? But if they're right, Reed, that's the universe of Phineas and Valeria."
And even if the human race survives, it could mean a war between worlds which exist side by side.
If only we could be sure.
Perhaps we can. I was already working on the problem of establishing one-way visual contact with Phineas's world. It was to be a surprise for Johnny, since I know he's fond of Valeria. But now, it may turn out to be a matter of life and death.
We see Reed crossing to this bit of equipment. It's basically a kind of fancy television. Activates it. We can see the picture coming through, and Reed says,
"There, I think I'm getting..."
We see Sue's reaction as she yells, "No, it just isn't possible."
But it's true. We're seeing it with our own eyes. Johnny's already there in the fifth dimension with Valeria and Phineas. And they're standing in the midst of what can only be an invasion force poised to strike at the Earth. And from the look of it, the Human Torch is on their side.
And we see Johnny with flame on, standing between Phineas and Valeria, the mass army of the fifth dimension, the blue-skinned warriors with their weapons raised, tanks rolling, angry faces staring right out at us, and one soldier right at the front, holding up a weapon which we can see is inscribed with "Manufactured by Interpolation Thermodynamics Unlimited." Gosh, well, that's a startling twist, and some captioning rounds out this issue.
That's about the size of it, Wonderstruck One. 3 worlds, each under sudden attack from a second, and braced to go to all-out war with still a third. How many worlds must die this day without ever knowing why? Next issue, the thing runs amok in duplicates.
So, a sample letter then on that issue. Here's a little missive from Baxter Building Bulletins in issue 165. "Dear Roy and Rich and Joe, after about 2 years of muddling about and treading water, the Fantastic Four has finally resumed its place as a strip of stature. The current 4-world war is easily the most complex plot we've been treated to in the FF since the Galactus Silver Surfer Psychoman epic of issues 74 to 77. Perhaps more so, and is definitely taking us into fields we've never been to before. This is what the FF is all about. It's what I came to expect of it when I started reading Marvels over 10 years ago, and it's been a long time returning. The FF was never such an exciting concept for a strip. I mean, there were only 4 of them. They all wore the same dull costumes. They had no gimmicks like secret identities or colourful pasts. Pretty dull. But of course the concept doesn't matter. It's what you do with that concept. What Stan and Jack did was stretch their own minds again and again and take the FF where no man or comic book has gone before. It was those trips that made the FF the major strip it was. Later, when those trips are no longer being taken, and either the strip was doing the same themes over and over, or even worse, ignoring the great voyages altogether for the sake of human interest storylines, the FF dragged. It was at those moments that you realise that the FF have only a few supporting characters, and they're a pretty lacklustre group compared to the Avengers, say. It's this that makes the FF one of the hardest strips in comics to do, and one which only a few are up to. Fortunately, that few does include Messrs. Thomas and Buckler. I hope you guys don't quit the strip. I know it would take the overkill horn to separate Joe Sinnott from the FF. Lately, Rich has been doing a lot of work elsewhere, and Roy's been making noises about making the Savage Sword of Conan monthly. Please, whatever you do, don't stop doing the Fantastic Four. If you do, no matter what other triumphs you go on to, Marvel will be a little poorer for it. And that letter is from future comic creator Peter B. Gillis, Elmsford, New York.
Peter B. Gillis. Fantastic. I love his stuff. It's good. The editorial response is, "Worry not, Pete. Even if our Conan Black and White were to go weekly, the Rascally one would drop any and all other projects before he would again drop the reins of the world's greatest comic magazine. Fact is, he soon plans to start doing Marvel 2-in-1, starring The Thing, Natch, on a regular basis, just to keep all the puppet strings in his nimble little hands. As for Riotous Rich, he's had to bow out for 3 or 4 issues to finish a couple of other projects, but he's now working full-time for Marvel rather than for any of our bereft competitors, and he rates the FF as high on his list of priorities, even as his own brainchild Deathlock, which is misspelled here.
Interesting.
He'll be back after these few fill-in issues by his longtime crony, George Perez.
Is that the first mention of George Perez on the podcast?
I think it might be.
Wow. So now, listeners, the next chunk of our epic is from issue 162 of the Fantastic Four, published on the 24th of June 1975, 6 days after Paul McCartney's 33rd birthday, and Peter's going to tell us about the cover.
The shocker you thought you'd never see. 2 things are deadlier than one.
We have 2 things, literally on the cover. Again, the thing's always front and centre, but this time it's a double whammy of things.
Yeah.
On the left, we have the Reed Richards thing, and on the right, we have our ever-loving blue-eyed Benji boy. And they are punching their way through a whole platoon of soldiers. And Reed thing is saying,
Nothing must stop us now. We're coming through.
And Bashful Benji is saying,
Or else it carry us out. Feet first.
And at the front, shooting at them, there is a familiar-looking general with a big thick white moustache and stogie in his mouth. And he's saying,
Then that's just what we're gonna do. Gosh, love this cover. You may have seen, listeners, on the socials the day before we released this episode, a photograph of Peter and I when one of us was holding a copy of issue 162 and the other was holding a copy of the complete Fantastic Four that reprinted that story. And you might have noticed the differences between them. We've got a whole bunch of foreign covers of these stories we've been covering in this episode. I'll put them all on the socials and you can compare and contrast and see how different they all look. They're fantastic. Pardon the pun. So, we dive into the comic. We are told that this story is called
The Shape of Things to Come.
See what they did there. Credits once again, it's basically Roy Thomas and Rich Buckler and Joe Sinnott again. Opening splash image is the Reed Richards thing, breaking out of restraints, yelling,
Let me out of here.
He's surrounded by jumpsuit-wearing goons. One of them yells, He's broken free of our electronic restrainers. Another one cries, Stop him! He must not escape! And a caption at the bottom of the page reads,
Look, we all know you can't fool all the people all of the time, true believer. So we won't even pretend that this isn't the Reed Richards of an alternate Earth. The Reed Richards who in his world was turned into a powerfully muscled, brick-skinned thing. But did ever our own Ben Grimm ever rage more angrily?
Yes, we see that Reed's thing is furious. He's rampaging around yelling,
Get out of my way, all of you, or I won't be responsible for what happens to...
And he breaks off because he's been struck. There's a zat sound effect because he's been struck by ARKON, who we haven't seen for a couple of issues, who's saying, But I will, man that is also monster. I, ARKON, called the Magnificent. He shouts down at the guards who fail to keep a hold of Reed Richards' thing, saying, You blundering, ineffectual oafs! I trusted you with one simple task, and if I not return precisely when I did... And then one of the craven little attendants says,
A 1,000 pardons, Lord Arkon.
We had correctly gauged his strength, but had grossly underestimated his potential adrenal quotient. Enough! I want no putrid excuses, only results. He sounds like one of my old HMV managers. I must tell you very quickly, right, this is a true story. I was on holiday for a week in the summer of 1999, right? Mm-hmm. And this is when I was working in HMV in Argyle Street. I'm not going to name names in case he's listening. But I came back from my holidays, and at that point I was the related products buyer, which meant I was in charge of blank tapes and headphones and storage boxes and all that sort of stuff. And while I'd been on my holiday, there'd been a flood in the Debenhams building. A pipe had burst, which had sent a deluge of water all the way along the corridors into all the breeze block lined rooms, and basically it wiped out an awful lot of stock, including the vast majority of the blank videotapes and blank audio tapes that I'd left behind for people to fill up while I was in my holidays. Mm-hmm. So I came back to find that all my dump bins were practically empty because people had been buying blank tapes. Because all the stock had been wiped out in the flood, no one had actually thought to buy any or to order any in because I was off. So I came back in, first day back after my holidays, full of excitement and joy and love, and probably enjoying the latest issue of JSA and Our Man and all that sort of thing. And I got an absolute roasting from my boss because of the fact that all my dump bins were empty. And I was like, insert name, I've just been on a holiday, I've just heard about this flood, no one's bothered to order any stock. And he said, and I quote, I want results, Dave, not excuses. I wonder if I could read issue 162 of Fantastic Four. Anyway, Arkon looks down as the attendants help Reed Thing to his feet, saying, Now, bind him with the adamantium chains which I have obtained. Not even his formidable strength can burst free of those. There's a chap nearby with a nice fancy headdress, who then points at all this and says, I think he'll offer us little trouble henceforward, sire. Then speak on, Greybeard, and tell me how progress is my plan for the destruction of 3 worlds. And this chap, Greybeard, who we now see is a kind of golden helmet on and a purple cloak, points to a big screen where we see the Flaming Johnny Storm standing with Phineas and the Fifth Dimensional Army. And Greybeard is saying, "Well, my lord, aye, very well indeed. As your most trusted adviser, I have monitored the 3 spheres in question by means of this 3D Scopatron image. For instance, in the world known popularly as the 5th Dimension, the so-called Human Torch has joined with Phineas blue-skinned natives for the purpose of invading the alternate Earth from which our grotesque captive came. This he does, as you well know, because deadly androids, created by the Reed Richards thing, attacked that dimension. And all the while, Phineas World does not suspect that the so-called true Earth of the Fantastic Four prepares in turn to attack them." ARKON then says, "That's the beauty of my subtle, if complex plan, Greybeard. 3 worlds existing side by side, each attacked by one, and thus moved to retaliate against it, while weapons developed by itself are used to devastate still a third. Soon each world will be at the throat of the other 2 in a true War of the Worlds." That's 2 H.G. Wells references already this issue. A caption then reads,
Special aside. Okay, we know that this is possibly the most complicated plot line since War and Peace. Thus Roy and Rich thought the 2 charts below might help a bit.
Yes, now we're going to put these charts on the socials, obviously, listeners. Shall we do our best to describe them?
Sure.
The first chart is captioned,
This chart shows how the weapons of Phineas and 2 Reed Richardses...
That's what it
That's
says.
weird. That's wrong.
I know.
Reed Richards.
Leave all this in.
are being used against another world.
Right, so what we see is there are 3 circles. One which has Earth of 5th Dimension, one that says Earth of Fantastic Four, and one that says Earth A, alternate Earth. So this is interesting. They're saying that the world we've been visiting in the 5th Dimension is another version of Earth. Interesting. And an arrow runs from each circle anti-clockwise to the next circle in a little loop. So the arrow running from Earth of 5th Dimension to Earth of the Fantastic Four has a caption that reads,
Heat-cold weapons of Phineas used to spur new ice age on Earth of Fantastic Four.
and an arrow running from Earth of Fantastic Four to Earth A, the alternate Earth where Reed is the Thing and Ben is human, has a caption that reads,
Dinosaurs and other time menaces summoned by time machine owned by Reed Richards of FF used to invade alternate Earth.
So are they saying that it was our Reed Richards time machine that was responsible? Right. Oh gosh, right. And then an arrow leads from Earth A, the alternate Earth, to Earth of 5th Dimension, and that one is captioned,
Andrones, open bracket, robots, devised by Reed Richards, aka The Thing, used to attack 5th Dimension.
Right, okay, that does make sense. Okay, right. The next diagram has a caption that reads,
This chart in turn reveals how the retaliatory forces of the attacked world prepare to fight back.
and what we see here is, again, 3 circles with Earth of 5th Dimension, Earth Fantastic Four, Earth A, alternate Earth, but the arrows run clockwise. So the arrow from Earth of Fantastic Four to Earth of 5th Dimension reads,
Earth forces prepare to assault 5th Dimension. If they can figure a way to get there, you do the time warp. Remember back in Strange Tales? Yes.
That's right. The arrow then running from Earth of 5th Dimension to Earth A, alternate Earth reads,
5D army set to invade alternate Earth.
and then the final arrow running from Earth A, alternate Earth to Earth of Fantastic Four reads,
Alternate Earth and drone army poised to attack Earth of Fantastic Four.
and then a little caption concludes saying,
Okay, now you're on your own.
don't worry, listeners, that's about as complicated as it gets, don't you worry. Right. Greybeard continues his report on page 4, telling how the Andron army is attacking energy plants on the FF home Earth. Also on True Earth, which is what it gets called during the story, the American army are preparing to fight to the death against the army from the 5th Dimension, who they hold responsible for the new Ice Age. On the alternate Earth where Reed is the Thing, there is turmoil caused by the appearance of soldiers from throughout history, thanks to the time machine created by Dr. Doom. Alternate Reed, the Thing of his Earth, pleads with ARKON to stop the insanity. ARKON refuses and leaves Reed on his own. We then see the Thing version of Reed, held secure, and a caption reads,
Perhaps, just perhaps, mind you, ARKON the Magnificent has made his first mistake. But even if he has, can a heavily sedated human monster take full advantage of it?
Back on True Earth, our Reed is trying to whip up a device to defrost the encroaching glacier, or as Peter suggested,
A global warmer, if you like.
Yes. And as Reed and Sue discuss his efforts, they're suddenly attacked by time-displaced cavemen and Native Americans. Good grief. Mr. Fantastic is able to stretch enough to deal with them, dismissing Sue's concern over the stiffness in his arm. Sue is even more concerned when Reed suddenly drops to the ground in agony, saying,
"It's my head. Suddenly it feels like it's splitting, as if someone else were inside my skull."
Reed drops to the ground. It looks like he's actually starting to smoke. There's pink energy bursting all around him, and then suddenly, in mid-air, in front of him, a rippling pink porthole appears, and we see the face of what looks like the thing. A voice says,
"You're absolutely right, Richards. There is. And it's yourself."
and we see in a wider image the head and shoulders of the Reed Richards version of the thing restrained in some sort of mechanical clamp as he looks down towards Sue and Reed. Sue says, "Now even I can see the image, but who?"
It must be. It is. That other thing. The one Alicia encountered on the street yesterday, before he was captured by the alien warrior called ARKON.
The other dimensional thing then says,
If you know that much, then you'll be prepared to accept this as well. I am the Reed Richards of an alternate Earth. An Earth where I, not Ben Grimm, was turned by cosmic rays into a hideous gargoyle.
Amazing as it sounds, I do believe you.
Our Reed looks very thoughtful as Sue says, "Reed, didn't our Ben hint at some such thing once when he returned from a trip into another dimension?" And then Asterisk reminds us once again,
After Ish 118. Roy. You're right, Sue. It all fits.
and we hear the other Reed as he says,
Then let me continue, for my time may be short. Like yourself, I'm a scientist, and I've continued my researches even since my accident. My special field is robotics, the building of robots and androids of every size, every shape, every use.
and we see the lab-coated version of the thing working on the giant torso of an androne.
What else can one do when one is too monstrous, too misshapen to walk among one's fellow men? Not long ago, a man called Devour came to me representing a large corporation called Interrelated Technocracies, IT for short, wishing to buy my one-man operation.
And we see Mr. Devour, who I can't remember if I described or not, but he has thin white hair, swept back, he's very stocky, as they used to say, has glasses, and he's holding a contract in his hand and a pen in his other, and he's offering them to Reed, who continues his narration.
Needing cash to continue my work, I foolishly accepted. Another who accepted before the interim of ZEMU's rule was Phineas, major scientist of the fifth dimension. In his sphere, the corporation is called Interpolitan Thermodynamics.
And we see Mr. Devour with Phineas and Valera.
Phineas specializes in temperature devices, which were what Devour was after, of course.
See how it all pieces together, listeners? We cut back to Reed and Sue as Reed says,
Wait a minute. Then the Devour who represents interlocking technocracies, the man who bought out Fantastic Four Inc., isn't really of Earth at all.
Hardly. He's a paid agent of ARKON, Empyrean, of still a fourth continuum, and ARKON's aim is to destroy the first three worlds with each other's weapons.
Sue looks appalled. She says, "Reed, that squares with what you learned from the Avengers records."
Don't I know it? But what about you, Richards? Are you all right?
I'm ARKON's captive. No willpower to break free.
But you're me, so maybe... Yes, it's worth a try.
And then we get a brilliant panel, which shows the sort of disembodied heads of the two versions of Reed Richards sort of reaching out to each other mentally, as our Reed says,
Perhaps, being the same man in a way, we can combine wills.
You're right. I feel stronger now. Much stronger.
and with a frack, we see the alternate Reed Richards, the Thing version, bursting out of his bonds. He says,
Free, but the contact is broken. We joined wills not a moment too soon. Now I know what I must do. I only hope I am powerful enough to do it. Alone.
Only minutes later, in our world, a dark-gloved hand reaches for a doorknob and grasps perhaps the fate of many worlds.
and we see that the door is marked Interlocking Technologies Unlimited, private. Reed and Sue burst in on Mr. Devour, demanding the facts on ARKON. Devour claims not to know who Reed means until Reed threatens to thump him, which is nice. Devour caves and starts crying. Back on the alternate Earth, Thing Reed has freed himself. And, as a caption acknowledges, by amazing coincidence, finds a newspaper telling him that the Ben Grimm version of the thing is being held by the army nearby. Thing Reed breaks through the wall of the prison, surprising Ben's sentries because he looks exactly like the monster they're guarding. Reed Thing frees our Thing, who remembers when he met him back in issue 118. There's another mention, another mention of 118 there. Reed Thing is keen they get away and suggests using the alleyway that he broke in by, but our Ben says,
I appreciate you rescuing me and all, but I clobbered a dinosaur a while back and saved the whole blamed city, and all they did was grok me up and throw me in a cell. Oh, I'm getting out of here all right, but not through no back door, or as my old Aunt Petunia used to say on alternate days, Geronimo!
With a smash, Ben bursts through the wall of the prison. Great shot of Ben looking right at the camera as if he's going to thump us. On breaking free, the two things are met by none other than the alternate Earth's version of General Thunderbolt Ross. That's probably who we saw on the cover. Amusingly, he describes Ben as an inhuman Hulk. So there you go. As Reed Thing tries to reassure the General, Ross compares him to his milksop son-in-law Bruce Banner, which raises the question, is there no Incredible Hulk on this alternate Earth?
Apparently not.
Trying to calm Ross down isn't working, but they're all interrupted by the arrival of the alternate Ben, who draws the Thing's attention to a massive rip in reality. This is spectacular. Hopefully we'll have room for this in the socials. The Things are astonished to see the Human Torch and the Fifth Dimensional Army approach them through this hole in space. Johnny in turn is surprised to see two Things and believes them to be fakes. He tussles with Ben, but Reed Thing grabs the torch and slams him to the ground. Reed has realised who Johnny is and says to Ben,
I know who it is, Ben. He's your world's version of Sue Grimm's brother, Johnny.
I ought to know. I attended his funeral in this world when he was killed in action in Nam.
Johnny sits up saying, Justin, who in blazes are you?
The name's Reed Richards.
Huh? Then Johnny gets to his feet. Ben takes his arm saying,
Trust him, Squirt. Our three worlds been tricked into fighting each other by that creep ARKON.
General Ross steps forward at this point saying, Stand aside, you three. This is war. And Johnny says, No, wait. And a caption very helpfully says,
Look, you know what happens next, don't you? Hot-tempered Johnny Storm, having seen the light, and since even Thunderbolt Ross doesn't care to do battle when there's no need, an uneasy truce is quickly declared, like so.
See Johnny gesturing to the Fifth Dimensional Army saying, As acting commander, appointed by Phineas, I command you return to the Fifth Dimension while I investigate the truth or falsehood of what these two have told me. Ben says,
I gotta hand it to you, kid. You can talk as square as our Reed when you gotta.
And as the Fifth Dimensional Army, all looking a bit disappointed at not getting to fight and, frankly, looking like Marvel Atlanteans to my eyes,
Yes.
one of them at the edge of the panel says,
Yes, we are going, Human Torch.
The Fifth Dimensional Army takes its leave, promising to keep an eye on Johnny. General Ross approaches, saying he wants to take them all in for questioning, but the Torch isn't having it, and creates a barrier of flame to isolate them from the army. Ben looks above, and behind him in the final panel of page 15, saying,
Uh-oh, heads up, crew. Looks like everybody wants to get in the act.
Holy smoke! Exclaims Johnny. It's the real Reed! And we see yet another dimensional portal through which we can see Mr. Fantastic and Mr. Devour. At Johnny's qualification, the alternate Reed Richards, the Thing version of him, says,
Real is a relative term, Johnny Storm, but I'll let that pass. Ah, Richards, I see you've caught Mr. Devour, the man who bought both us and Phineas.
And a very angry-looking Reed says through the dimensional hole,
Yes, and with a minimal amount of friendly persuasion, I persuaded him to talk about the true power behind all three IT groups. ARKON. If ARKON can produce nuclear wars on our three worlds simultaneously, he'll produce enough atomic power to run his own world for millennia. The Avengers stopped him cold once before. Now it's our turn. Devour told me of a swirling nexus, equidistant from all three dimensions, previously unknown to us.
And Reed points to a chart which shows, again, orbiting each other almost the 5D Earth, our Earth, the alternate Earth, and in the middle, what looks like a fingerprint, but a little squiggle which is labelled as the Nexus. And Reed continues,
It is through this nexus, this hole in time and space, that the power would reach ARKON's world. We must destroy that nexus so that ARKON never again has the option of saving his world by destroying ours. These skate-like devices of Devour's will enable you to travel interdimensionally to reach the nexus.
And Reed has sent through the porthole some little metallic devices that almost look like metallic shoes with bits hanging off them. We get a bit more of an idea of how they work in the next issue, don't panic. And Johnny says to this, "You want us all three to hightail it there?"
No. From what I learned, that approach would lead to sheer disaster. The other two must go to ARKON's sphere, attack him on his home ground in case the other assault fails.
As the flame barrier that Johnny's created to keep the army out starts to subside, the Thing says,
Well, what the hey, egghead? We gotta go somewhere, right? The natives here are getting a mite restless.
and we can see that the Thing has put on the skates that we'd sent through. Attached to his big clumpy feet, they look absolutely hilarious. It looks like he's standing in two old-fashioned hoovers, quite frankly. Johnny and Thing Reed activate their devices and leap through a portal to arrive on ARKON's world. And our Ben appears in space after activating his and exclaims,
Yeesh, this place is even creepier than the negative zone.
Yep, with a burst of orange energy, Ben appears to be floating in space. He starts drifting forward. We can see he has another device wrapped around his waist. Looks like he's got a Walkman, quite frankly. As he zooms forward, using his new exciting footwear, he says,
I ain't too hot in these skate things of reeds, but if I can just remember my old days at the Rockefeller Center ice rink, maybe I can... Hey, that solid black area I'm coming to. That must be the... what's this? The Nexus. But who in blazes is that in front of it?
And in the final panel, full splash page, issue 162, we see, against the blackness of space, there's a rippling black hole, and in front of that, what I can only describe as an outer space superhero space ice hockey goalie. Red and yellow tight-fitting gear, large mitts, like a goalie would wear. He's got shin guards, he's on golden space roller skates, and he's holding a large metallic golden ice hockey stick. Good grief, this new arrival exclaims, "Fool that you are! Did you think the mighty ARKON would leave the all-important Nexus unprotected? I am Guard," that's spelt G-A-A-R-D, "and you need know no more, since, in a few mere milliseconds, you shall be dead." To which Ben thinks,
Holy crow, here I can barely stand up, and that guy's zipping around like he was born in those skate gizmos. Sonia Heaney, where are you now that I need you?
and a caption reads,
Next, the final free-for-all. Yeah, we know that's not too melodramatic, but take it from us, you can leave your kit gloves at home.
Gosh, well that's the end of issue 162. So, jumping forward to the letters page from issue 166, we're just going to read you one letter because, again, it's all people claiming no prizes for silly mistakes, which, to be honest, I didn't even register when I was reading it. But this letter from Carl Dennison, who I think we've had letters from before. I recognise his name. Carl says, Dear Roy, Rich and Joe, I've been waiting a long time for someone to realise the full potential that these three worlds, Earth, Alternate Earth and the Fifth Dimension, could have if all three were used in one epic story. Wouldn't you know it, it'd be Marvel's top writer, Roy Thomas. And what better mag to use the worlds in than the world's greatest comic magazine? And what better artist for that mag than the fabulous team of Rich Buckler and Joe Sinnott? And if you get the idea that I love the present FF mags, give yourself a chromium-plated no prize. As we say, Carl Dennison from Hendersonville, NC. Where's that?
North Carolina.
Yeah. There's a quick editorial response.
Now, there's a guy we can appreciate. Somebody wants to give the Blushing Bullpen a no prize for a change. Your All Heart CD, or to quote Benjamin J. Grimm, way back in FF4,
That and a dime get me a cup of coffee.
only thing is, now it won't even do that. Oh well, thanks anyway, guy.
Awesome. Right. Well, listeners, we're nearly there. Final stretch, I promise. Issue 163, published on the 22nd of July 1975, the same day as X-Men 95. So let's have a moment's silence for Thunderbird.
That's enough.
Yes, poor Thunderbird. I think I've said this elsewhere already, but Thunderbird and his ability to turn into a grizzly bear is probably directly responsible for me sitting here right now. But anyway, the cover of FF163.
We have Bashful Benji at the front again. He's being attacked by Guard, who we saw at the end of the last issue. Human Torch is throwing fireballs at Guard, and coming through a dimensional gateway, it seems, is Reed stretching in, and Sue reaching out. Is she casting a force field? We don't know, because we can't see it because it's invisible.
Gosh. Right then, listeners, here we go. We pick up with the last issue finished, with Guard announcing himself to Ben, and lightning crackling off his space hockey stick, and almost in sympathy, some jagged lettering reads, Finale! The first 4.5 pages are basically an ice hockey-themed space fight, back and forth between Ben and Guard, with Ben making reference to Bernie Perron, who my good mate, my only pal from school I'm still in touch with, Barry Bryce, assures me was the then goalie for the Philadelphia Flyers. So that's quite interesting.
There we are.
And as Ben tries to deliver the disc that will destroy the Nexus, he takes a big hit and feels close to giving up. But he suddenly hears a voice.
No, Ben, you can't. You don't dare.
What? Who's that? Get out of my mind.
Not till you remember what's at stake.
Reed, I'm at an own.
And we see Mr. Fantastic's face hovering through yet another handy dimensional porthole as he says,
Can only transmit for a moment. So remember, Ben, 3 worlds.
Yeah, I know. Long as that black hole exists over there, ARKON's got a stake in getting our 3 Earths to blow each other up. If it don't exist, then it's a brand new ball game. So better warm up that joystick of yours again, goalie baby, 'cause I'm gonna win this one for the Kipper. Him and maybe 9 billion other guys.
Ben squares up again, and we cut back to our Earth, i.e. the home of the FF, as Mr. Fantastic gives a brief, handy recap of recent events, as he rants at Mr. DeVour, concluding with,
And if 2 Earths in the 5th dimension go up in a mushroom cloud, you'll pay for it before they go. That I swear.
Mr. DeVour starts to explain that it wasn't his fault, and he basically tells us a story about how ARKON approached him. DeVour was a businessman contemplating suicide because of his failures, and then ARKON came out of nowhere and promised him everything he wanted. And we see, once again, the diagram showing the alternate Earths and the Nexus, and Argon's telling DeVour about how he can power his world using nuclear blasts and everything that goes on with that, and poor Mr. DeVour, unaware that his Earth would be at risk. You start to see the error of his ways, basically, listeners. At this point, the Fantastic Four's dimension scanner manages to tune in on Johnny and the Reed thing, and we then see them battling ARKON's goon squad across a couple of action-packed pages. Johnny flies off to track down ARKON, who manages to get a jump on the torch, surprising him and beating him down. Thankfully, though, Reed of the alternate Earth, i.e. Reed that's a version of the thing, catches up and manages to deal with ARKON, rescuing Johnny. And after Reed thing smashes ARKON into a machine with a crack, he starts talking about everything he's had to deal with and everything he's gone through.
You can negotiate, accommodate, fly all the peace shuttles you want, but without the sheer muscle to back it up, you're just whistling down a hole. And me, I'm the worst of all. Too busy puttering away in my ivory tower to look up from my precious test tubes and see what was going on, till I was too late in 2 wars.
Johnny, who's fiddling with some equipment at this point, turns and says, 2 wars? I don't get you, pal. But don't be too hard on yourself.
Too hard? When the Johnny Storm I knew, Sugrim's brother, was blown to pieces in Vietnam last year, while I was making war androids and not worrying too much about who was paying the bills.
Johnny's obviously startled by this. He starts to say, the Johnny Huh? You mean? Uh-oh. Getting a signal on his gizmo. Yep, we get a signal coming through on one of ARKON's machines, and it's Sue. And she warns Johnny that Ben is losing his battle with Guard. On our Earth, Mr. DeVour reiterates the danger of another living being entering the sector of hyperspace that Guard is protecting. Basically, the new arrival would drain the life force of the one who was there first. So if someone tries to go and help Ben, it'll basically kill him. Our Reed has the beginning of an idea, telling Ben to try and stay away from Guard for a few moments, but Guard slams into Ben with a space hockey stick. Ben makes another attempt to send the disc to the target area in the Nexus, when Guard suddenly sees another thing out of the corner of his eye. Guard throws his space hockey scepter at the newcomer, who then vanishes, leaving Guard weaponless. Ben skates up, knocks Guard out, and sends the disc home.
Hoo-ha! A hole-in-one!
Cries Ben.
This is like the whole blamed wide world of sports all rolled up together. Hey, that Nexus thing is exploding.
Yes, and we see, instead of the black hole in space, bursts of yellow energy and pink and purple clouds. But then Ben notices...
No, it ain't. It's imploding, I think Reed'd say. It's getting smaller every second. Going, gone. Hotcha! I just say 3 worlds. At least I think that's what I did.
And Guard, who has recovered consciousness, says, "While I have failed."
Yeah? Does that mean we gotta lock horns again, pal? I don't know why, but somehow I'd just as soon not.
Guard starts to float off from Ben at this point, saying, "There is no point to further battle. Leave me, please, to face my future exile in peace,
Yeah, sure.
says Ben, who starts to vanish in a burst of white energy, thinking,
Usually when I fight a guy, I learn his origin at least, and most times I could care less. Dunno how come I think it would have mattered this time. Maybe I'm just getting soft in my old age.
and as Ben fades out, a caption reads,
Perhaps, Ben Grimm, or perhaps you sensed ever so dimly the dark truth of Guard's alter ego. If so, perhaps it's best you don't know of ARKON's search months earlier through the Southeast Asian jungles of an alternate Earth, of ARKON's salvaging of a shell-torn body, his restructuring of a human mind.
and we see Guard reaching up, starting to take off his mask.
A mind which now thinks only of its owner as someone called Guard, forgetting that he had once been named Johnny Storm.
And the mask comes off, and we see the familiar face of our pal Johnny Storm, the Human Torch. The captioning continues,
Yes, perhaps it is best.
and we see Guard, with his head down, skating silently off into the distance of space. Back on True Earth, as we've come to know it, Johnny returns through a dimensional portal, followed soon after by Ben. As Ben gets to his feet, Reed says,
Well, Ben, aren't you going to ask me how I managed to materialize a second thing in hyperspace when I'd learned earlier it was impossible?
Nah, I just figured you just pulled a couple of Framet stats together and broadcast an image of my lookalike holding a phony frisbee. What's the big deal? When you put it that way, old friend, nothing at all. Just one more thing, Reed. Yes? Thanks.
we see in the background the Reed thing on a screen, but we don't really hear from him, sadly. Johnny expresses concern about interlocking technologies unlimited, but Reed is of the opinion it will fade quietly away on Three Worlds, and Mr. DeVour sheepishly agrees. The story ends with a happy family all together and Alicia reunited with the real Ben, and not just someone who sounds like him.
The end.
The end indeed. Well, listeners, that's hopefully that hasn't been as much of an endurance test for you to listen to as it was for us to prepare and record. Before we go to the last couple of letters of comment, what's your thoughts on the whole saga, Peter?
I really thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a rip-roaring runaround. It's very Roy Thomas, very Rascally, very continuity heavy, but filled with pathos, filled with all the Marvel angst, filled with all the drama and soap opera, action-packed. Rich Buckler's artwork's fantastic in this.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so good. I thoroughly enjoyed it, although I must admit, Guard as an ice hockey guard looks ridiculous.
Yes.
But in saying that, you know, we've had the Black Racer in DC and we've had the Silver Surfer in Marvel. Is it really that much of a stretch?
Yes. What could it be called? The Crimson Keeper?
Crimson Keeper, I like that. Yeah,
know.
that'll do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Scarlet Saver.
Yeah. When I was doing the prep for this initially, listeners, it didn't really fully register on me when I was skimming through it all before I started writing all the notes and the partial summaries that he was so closely based on an ice hockey goalie. And it's a shame that it's maybe the last thing that I take away from it was after this really, really, really well structured epic, taking in all these other universes and the different versions of the thing and all that, and calling back to two older stories and making, tying them all together in a way which really reminds me of an All-Star Squadron story that we'll get to in a few years.
Mm-hmm.
Roy's got to finish it with a jokey thing with a space goalie that ends up being the alternate version of Johnny.
Who was killed in Nam.
Yeah, I didn't see that twist coming.
Yeah.
But that's one interesting thing about it, is the different versions of Reed, Sue, Johnny and Ben. I mean, the alternate version of Sue is a complete non-entity. And our Sue doesn't really get much to do in this beyond helping protect the Hidden Refuge. She doesn't really contribute much to this the second sort of wave of the issues we've covered this week.
Very true, yeah.
It's an epic, and listeners, we're going to cut our discussion on it short because we're both very tired. I really enjoyed it. It feels very Marvel. It feels very Roy. It reminds me of some of the other arcs from around this era, like maybe the Defenders. The Defenders also had that sort of ongoing, sort of rolling soap opera narrative, and a story would sprawl out over 6 or 7 issues and take in 2 or 3 other different plots, as it was all happening. It reminded me very much of that. A couple of points that are recaps that kind of get you back up to speed if you've missed the other issues, but I was impressed at how little of that there was.
Very true, yeah.
Just a couple of summing up moments. I agree with you. I think the artwork is beautiful.
Yeah.
It really felt like it was kind of holding steam all the way through. It didn't feel like it was kind of running out of energy.
Unlike us.
I do feel that a lot of the important stuff seemed to happen off camera. Like, we didn't really get a proper resolution on the glaciers, for example.
Yeah, true. Mm-hmm.
I don't think the fifth dimension was ever referred to again, from what I've been able to find out.
Not that I'm aware of, but I think I've not really investigated further than this.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, I think from what I could see, there's just a few appearances of ZEMU and Phineas. I'm sure Ross will tell us, or maybe when Ross and Kirby get to these issues of the FF, or maybe beyond them, they can let us know.
Yeah.
But it was, for a 6-issue epic, I think when you read it all in one go, you're bound to kind of notice some of the things that don't hold up.
Yeah.
Like, friend of the show, Martin Gray, pointed out recently some of the contradictions in the recent Justice Society series, you know, the one that the Jeff Johns one that finished, how the character of the Legionnaire, how when he first appeared, some of his dialogue didn't really fit in with what they ended up doing with it. So I think sometimes when you're trying to do an epic, you kind of lose sight of it all. I just hope Lockjaw got home okay. I've kind of forgotten what happened to him. He kind of disappeared.
He can go anywhere, that's fine.
Yeah, I hope he's all right.
One of the things I loved was the repetition of the diagram they had of the three worlds.
Yes.
I found that hilarious, the fact that this kept on coming up.
Yes.
Just, here's a handy hint for the reader.
Yes.
There's a very similar thing that happens in the Justice League, Justice Society, New Gods crossover that will eventually get to much, much further in the future.
Yes.
But again, there's another very simplistic diagram showing Darkseid's plan.
I can't wait. I have read that story, but probably not since I first bought the issues in about 1992 or 93. So
it's Dick Dillon's final story.
Yeah, of course, that's right, because he died.
And George Perez's first.
Yeah, Perez had to take over, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't think we really get much more to say to this. I hope that the subplot of Mr. Fantastic feeling a bit arthritic gets dealt with in a future issue. Maybe I'll have to keep reading and find out.
Shall
we have a quick look and see if there are any other letters worth covering before we go?
So we'll skip ahead to the letters page in issue 167, and there's a letter from Christy Marks, and it goes like this. Roy, Rich and friends. Rich and Joe are a phenomenal team. The scenes by the nexus between Ben and Guard were cosmically lovely. How is it that this team does not produce any other mags? Guard himself is a funky character, but fun, and I was pleased to note that I had correctly guessed his identity. I just hope you don't get carried away and end up with a cosmic roller derby. Or maybe a stock car race in space. Glad you got rid of him with this issue. Thanks, Christy, for that one. Editorial response is...
You're confused as Christy. We'd had an overwhelming majority of letters which praised the concept of Guard to the skies and asked for or demanded more. We also had a sprinkling of letters which deplored the whole idea, calling it a rip-off of the Silver Surfer rather than the semi-parody, semi-serious creation that Roy and Rich meant it to be. But yours is the only missive to our knowledge that seemed to love the character, yet said you were glad we got rid of him. Just for that, we're likely to send you a nefarious no prize, even though you weren't trying for one. Sheesh. I will quickly read the next letter. Dear Bullpen, I'm writing to point out a shameful error regarding Fantastic Four 163. The cover of your mag depicts Guard engaged in battle with both the Torch and the Thing, whereas in the story he took great pains to point out that only two living beings could dwell in that section of hyperspace at a time. Therefore, despite a good story and excellent artwork, you guys goofed. Please send my no prize to Enrico Fells, West Avenue, New York, and the editorial response basically admits this and says that they had to take artistic license. Again, Defenders 39 did not exist in a vacuum. There were quite a lot of other covers that lied to the audience. Right. Listeners, we've been recording for a couple of hours at this point, so we're going to wind it up. Because Peter and I are both working tomorrow, and we want to get to our kip and all that sort of stuff. I need to shave, anyway.
Listeners, do you need to shave? You can write to us and tell us at the earth2podcast@gmail.com. Make sure you follow us on social media, because we're putting up lots of lovely bonus material, and there is an awful lot of bonus material for this.
Oh, yes.
And also for every other episode. On Facebook and Instagram, we're at the Earth2 Podcast, and on Twitter, we're at podcast_Earth2, and it is the number 2 for all of our socials.
Yes, this will be the last episode of the Earth-616 podcast for a little while. Mm-hmm. We are planning a couple more visits to the Marvel Universe in the future, so spread the word and stay tuned and keep on your toes. We really hope you've enjoyed these. I've enjoyed the preparation. I'm sure Peter's enjoyed the editing. As I always say at this point, if you're feeling generous, you go to wherever it is you receive your podcast and leave us a positive review. Or tell your pals and spread the word. If you're feeling even more generous, please go to our coffee page and buy Peter the price of a beverage as he sits in Cafe Nero or Costa for hours at a time, trying to get this all down into a manageable chunk. Next week, it'll be a little bit of a shorter episode as we try and recover a bit of space and a bit of ground. What's happening next week? Well, you'll have to tune in. Same bat time, same bat channel.
On that bat shell, I've been Peter.
And I've been David. We'll see you soon on
the Earth 2 podcast.
Transmatter cube activated. Return coordinates set for Earth Prime.
Somebody who wants to give the Blush and Bull prize a no prize. Somebody who wants to give the Blush and Bull prize a no. I keep saying Bull prize. I've been up since 3.
I know.